The whispers started the moment Tabitha Crenshaw stepped off the stagecoach in Spokane, Washington, her full figure drawing eyes like moths to lamplight in the dusty spring afternoon of 1882. She had traveled 3 weeks from Ohio, answering an advertisement for a seamstress position, but the pinched faces of the women gathered outside the general store told her everything she needed to know about her prospects in this timber town nestled in the vast Washington territory. Their mouths formed tight lines of disapproval as they took in her curves, the way her traveling dress fit snugly across her hips and bosom, the fullness of her frame that no amount of corseting could diminish. Tabitha lifted her chin and gripped her carpetbag tighter, refusing to let them see how their stares cut into her confidence like shards of glass. At 22 years old, she had endured a lifetime of such looks, heard every cruel comment about her body whispered behind fans and gloved hands. Her mother had warned her that proper ladies should be willowy and delicate, that men wanted fragile flowers they could protect. But Tabitha had never been fragile, and she had learned long ago that shrinking herself to fit other people's expectations was a losing battle. "You must be Miss Crenshaw," a reedy voice called out. A woman approached, her frame so narrow her dress seemed to hang on her bones like a curtain on a rod. "I am Mrs. Henrietta Whitmore. I placed the advertisement for a seamstress." "Yes, madam," Tabitha said, extending her hand. "I am pleased to make your acquaintance. I brought samples of my work as you requested in your letter." Mrs. Whitmore's gaze traveled down Tabitha's body with obvious disapproval, lingering on every curve, every generous line. "I see. Well, the position has been filled, I am afraid." The words landed like stones in Tabitha's stomach. "Filled? But I received your letter only 6 weeks ago, confirming my arrival today. I have traveled all this way." "Yes, well, circumstances have changed." Mrs. Whitmore's expression remained cold and unyielding. "A local girl applied just yesterday, and I felt it prudent to hire from within our community. I am certain you understand." Tabitha understood perfectly. She understood that Mrs. Whitmore had taken one look at her figure and decided she was unsuitable, too voluptuous for polite society, too much woman for a respectable establishment. The familiar burn of humiliation rose in her chest, but she swallowed it down and forced herself to speak calmly. "I see. Might you know of any other positions available in town? I find myself in need of employment and lodging." Mrs. Whitmore's lips pursed even tighter if such a thing were possible. "I cannot imagine what would be suitable. Good day, Miss Crenshaw." She turned and walked away, her friends clustering around her like a flock of sparrows, their whispered comments and sidelong glances making it clear that Tabitha was the subject of their gossip. Standing alone on the wooden sidewalk with her single bag and dwindling savings, Tabitha felt the weight of her circumstances settle over her like a heavy blanket. She had burned her bridges in Ohio, given up her small room above the bakery where she had worked for meager wages, spent nearly all her money on the journey west. The promise of a fresh start had sustained her through the long, uncomfortable travel, but now that hope crumbled like dry earth between her fingers. The afternoon sun beat down on Spokane's Main Street, where false-fronted buildings lined the rutted road. Wagons rolled past, loaded with timber from the surrounding forests. Men in worn work clothes and muddy boots moved between the saloons and supply stores, while women in modest dresses hurried about their errands, most of them giving Tabitha a wide berth as though her curves might somehow be contagious. She needed to find lodging before nightfall, needed to assess her options with a clear head. The Spokane House Hotel stood at the end of the street, a 2-story structure that looked moderately respectable. Tabitha walked toward it, acutely aware of every eye that followed her progress, every whispered comment that trailed in her wake. The hotel clerk, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose, quoted her a rate that would drain her remaining funds within a week. She took the room anyway, knowing she had little choice, and climbed the narrow stairs to a small chamber that smelled of old tobacco and lye soap. Once inside with the door closed behind her, she finally allowed herself to sink onto the thin mattress and let out the breath she had been holding. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. Crying would accomplish nothing. She had faced rejection before and survived. She would find a way forward here too, somehow. Rising from the bed, she unpacked her few belongings and washed her face in the basin, studying her reflection in the spotted mirror. Round cheeks, full lips, dark brown hair that curled despite her best efforts to pin it smooth. Her figure, the source of so much criticism, was simply part of who she was. She could not change it, and she was tired of apologizing for it. By evening, after inquiring at every shop and business establishment on the main street, Tabitha had to accept the bitter truth. No one in Spokane wanted to hire her. The excuses varied, but the underlying message remained the same. She was too much, too different, too improper for their tidy little town. The hotel's dining room served a simple supper of venison stew and bread, which she ate alone at a corner table while conversations swirled around her. None directed her way. "Heard tell there is a storm coming in from the north," one grizzled prospector said to his companion. "Could bring snow, even this late in spring. Mountains do not care much about the calendar." "Bad time for it," his friend replied. "Ranchers up in the high country will have their hands full." Tabitha only half listened, too preoccupied with her own troubles to worry about weather. But the mention of ranchers sparked a thought. Perhaps she was looking in the wrong place. Town positions were clearly beyond her reach, but what about the outlying farms and ranches? Surely they needed help, and perhaps they would be less particular about a woman's appearance when faced with the practical demands of frontier life. The next morning, she inquired at the livery stable about hiring a horse and wagon to explore the surrounding area. The stable master, a gruff man with tobacco-stained teeth, looked her up and down with frank appreciation rather than disapproval. "You know how to handle a wagon, miss." "I grew up on a farm in Ohio," Tabitha said, which was true enough, though she had left out the part about her father losing that farm to drink and debt. "I can manage a team. Cost you $2 for the day, and I will want the rig back by sundown." It was highway robbery, but she paid it and set out with a rough map the stable master had sketched, showing the locations of the larger homesteads and ranches in the area. The road north led through stands of towering pines and past rushing streams still swollen with snowmelt. The air smelled clean and sharp, so different from the sooty industrial tang of Ohio's cities. Despite her circumstances, Tabitha felt a flicker of appreciation for the wild beauty of this territory. She stopped at 3 homesteads that morning. The first family, a Norwegian couple with 6 children, looked at her with confusion when she offered her services as a seamstress or cook or general help. "We manage ourselves," the wife said in heavily accented English, eyeing Tabitha's figure with the same disapproval she had seen in town. "We need no help." The second homestead belonged to an older widow who seemed more concerned with Tabitha's unmarried status than her sewing skills. "I cannot have an unmarried woman of your age staying on my property," she declared. "It would not be proper. People would talk." The third stop yielded no answer at all, just barking dogs and a house that appeared empty. Discouraged but not yet defeated, Tabitha consulted her map and noticed a notation for a property further north, almost at the edge of the paper. Homestead of Quentin Harris, it read, with a note that said cattle remote. The temperature had dropped noticeably since morning, and dark clouds were gathering on the northern horizon, promising the storm the prospectors had discussed. Tabitha should have turned back, returned to town while the road remained passable. But something drove her forward, some stubborn refusal to give up without exhausting every possibility. She urged the horses onward, following the increasingly rough track as it climbed into higher country. By early afternoon, fat snowflakes began to fall, startling in their size and abundance. Within minutes, the spring storm transformed into a howling blizzard, the kind that could kill the unprepared. Tabitha could barely see the road ahead, could not see the horses' heads through the driving white. Panic clawed at her throat as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. She should have turned back hours ago. Now she was lost in a blizzard in unfamiliar territory with darkness approaching. The horses knew better than she did. They pulled right off what little remained of the visible road and made their way toward a break in the trees. Tabitha let them have their heads, trusting their instincts over her own failing vision. Through the white curtain, a dark shape emerged. A barn. Then a house, solid and squared against the storm. She hauled on the reins, her hands numb with cold despite her gloves. Before she could climb down from the wagon, the house door flew open and a figure emerged, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with purpose through the knee-deep snow. "Get inside," a deep voice commanded. "I will see to the horses." Tabitha did not argue. She half fell from the wagon seat, her skirts immediately soaking through as she waded toward the house. The man was already unhitching the team, moving with the easy competence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. She caught only a glimpse of a face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat before she stumbled through the door into warmth. The interior of the house was spare but clean, dominated by a large stone fireplace where a fire crackled and threw dancing shadows across log walls. Tabitha stood dripping on the wooden floor, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She did not know if it was from cold or fear or relief at being out of the deadly storm. Minutes later, the man entered, stamping snow from his boots and shaking it from his coat. He removed his hat, revealing dark blonde hair and a face weathered by sun and wind but handsome in a rugged way, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw shadowed with several days' growth of beard. His eyes, she noticed, were a startling blue, the color of summer sky, and they studied her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "You are half frozen," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that spoke of southern origins. "Get out of those wet things. There is a room through that door where you can change. I will heat some water for coffee." "I apologize for the intrusion," Tabitha managed through chattering teeth. "I was searching for homesteads, offering my services, and the storm caught me unawares." "We can discuss it once you are dry and warm. Go on now, before you catch your death." The room he indicated was clearly a bedroom, neat and masculine, with a large bed covered in quilts and a wardrobe against one wall. Tabitha peeled off her soaked dress and undergarments, her fingers fumbling with buttons and laces. She found a blanket and wrapped it around herself, then returned to the main room where the man was indeed making coffee in a battered pot over the fire. He glanced up at her and something flickered in his expression, though she could not read it. "Better. Hang your clothes on that rack by the fire. They will dry by morning, though you are stuck here until this storm blows through. Could last a day or two, judging by the look of it." "I am Tabitha Crenshaw," she said, draping her garments carefully over the wooden drying rack. "I arrived in Spokane 2 days ago from Ohio." "Quentin Harris," he replied, handing her a tin cup filled with steaming coffee. "This is my homestead, such as it is." Been here 3 years, running cattle in the summer, mostly trying not to freeze in the winter. Tabitha wrapped her hands around the cup, savoring its warmth. Now that she was no longer in immediate danger, she became acutely aware of her situation. She was alone with a strange man in a remote location, wearing nothing but a blanket, with no way to leave until the storm passed. By any measure of propriety, her reputation would be ruined if word got out. But then again, her reputation in Spokane was already sullied by nothing more than the shape of her body. What did she have to lose? You said you were offering your services, Quentin prompted, settling into a chair near the fire. He was a big man, she realized, probably 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and large, capable hands. But his manner was calm and unthreatening, his gaze more curious than predatory. I am a seamstress by trade, but I can cook, clean, tend animals, do general labor. I came west for a position that fell through, and I find myself in need of employment and lodging. She decided honesty was her best approach. I should tell you that I have had no luck in town. The people there find me unsuitable. Unsuitable how? His blue eyes narrowed slightly. Tabitha gestured at herself, at the curves the blanket could not entirely hide. I am not built to their specifications. Too much of everything, according to the women of Spokane. Too improper, too bold, too different. They made their feelings quite clear. Quentin was silent for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Then he said, "Fools, the lot of them, but their loss, I reckon. You are kind to say so." "I am not being kind, I am being truthful." He stood and moved to a cupboard, pulling out bread and cheese and dried meat. "You hungry? I was about to fix supper when I heard your wagon." They ate together as the storm raged outside, the wind howling like wolves and hurling snow against the windows with enough force to rattle the glass. Quentin told her about his journey west from Texas after the war, how he had worked as a ranch hand for years before saving enough to file a homestead claim in this remote corner of Washington Territory. The land was good, he said, with water and grass for cattle, timber for building. But it was lonely and the work was brutal, especially in winter. "I am not going to lie to you," he said, his blue eyes serious in the firelight. "Life up here is hard. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away and they only come around twice a year. Town is a 2-hour ride in good weather, impossible in bad. The cold will freeze your breath in your lungs come January, and the isolation will make you question your sanity. I have been managing on my own, but it is taking its toll. Are you offering me a position?" Tabitha asked, hardly daring to hope. "I am considering it. I could use help around the place. Someone to cook proper meals instead of the slop I throw together, someone to tend the vegetable garden and the chickens, maybe help with lighter ranch work. In return, I can offer room, board, and wages. $30 a month, which is what I would pay any hired hand." $30 was more than she had ever earned in Ohio. It was generous, perhaps too generous. "Why?" she asked bluntly. "You do not know me. I could be a terrible cook or a lazy worker." "You could be," he agreed. "But you struck out into a spring storm in unfamiliar country rather than give up your search for work. That tells me you have grit. And frankly, Miss Crenshaw, I am desperate enough to take a chance. I cannot do another year alone up here without losing my mind entirely. What about propriety? An unmarried woman living with an unmarried man, alone in the wilderness. People will assume the worst." Quentin's expression hardened. "I do not give a damn what people assume. This is my land, my home. Anyone who does not like my choices can stay the hell away, but I will be straight with you. I am looking for help, nothing more. You will have your own room, your own space. I am not the kind of man who takes advantage. You can trust me on that." Looking into his steady blue gaze, Tabitha believed him. More than that, she felt something shift inside her, some recognition that this rough cowboy with his honest words and direct manner was different from anyone she had ever met. He had not once looked at her with the disgust she had seen in so many eyes. He had not commented on her curves except to call the townspeople fools for rejecting her. He had simply offered her work, fair wages, and respect. "I accept your offer, Mr. Harris," she said. "When can I start?" A slow smile spread across his weathered face, transforming it entirely. "Call me Quentin. And I reckon you already started, seeing as you are stuck here for the duration of this storm. Might as well make yourself useful." That night, after Quentin had insisted she take his bed while he made do with blankets on the floor by the fire, Tabitha lay awake listening to the wind howl and the logs settle in the fireplace. She had left Spokane that morning with dwindling hope and no prospects. Now she had a job, a place to stay, and the strangest feeling that her life had just changed direction in a way she could not yet fully comprehend. The storm lasted 3 days, during which Tabitha learned the rhythms of Quentin's homestead. She cooked meals that made his eyes widen with appreciation after years of his own bland cooking. She organized his chaotic supplies, mended his worn clothes, and helped him tend to the small herd of cattle he kept in a sheltered pasture near the house. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, or sometimes they talked, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for their futures. Tabitha learned that Quentin had fought for the Confederacy as a young man barely older than 18, had seen horrors he would not speak of, and had come west to escape the ruined South and start fresh. He had no family left, no ties to anywhere or anyone. This homestead was everything he had worked for, the only thing that mattered to him. In turn, she told him about her childhood on the failing farm, her mother's death when she was 15, her father's descent into drink. She told him about the years of working whatever job she could find, enduring the constant criticism of her appearance, the way she had learned to make herself small and quiet to avoid notice. "Why do you do that?" Quentin asked one evening as they sat by the fire after supper. The storm had finally broken, leaving the world outside blanketed in white. "Do what? Make yourself small. You are always apologizing for taking up space, for existing. It is like you think you do not have the right to be here." His observation struck her like a physical blow, all the more powerful for its accuracy. "I suppose I have spent so long being told I am too much that I started believing it." Quentin leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. "You listen to me, Tabitha Crenshaw. You are not too much. You are exactly right, exactly as you should be. Any person who made you feel otherwise is a damn fool, pardon my language. Out here, we do not have room for that kind of nonsense. Out here, you are judged by what you can do, by your character and your strength. And from what I have seen these past 3 days, you have both in abundance." Warmth flooded through her, and not from the fire. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, with such conviction and respect. She found herself blinking back tears, overwhelmed by emotions she could not name. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than you can know." Something passed between them in that moment, something electric and dangerous and thrilling. Quentin seemed to feel it too because he stood abruptly and moved to the window, putting distance between them. "Storm has passed," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I will take you back to town tomorrow to collect your things and return that rented rig. Then we can get you properly settled here." The return to Spokane the next day was an education in small-town gossip and cruelty. Word had already spread that Tabitha had been caught in the storm, that she had spent 3 days alone with Quentin Harris in his remote homestead. The whispers that had followed her before became open stares and pointed comments. Women pulled their skirts aside as she passed, as though she carried some contagion. Men looked at her with knowing smirks, as though they could see through her clothes to the woman beneath. Mrs. Whitmore accosted her outside the general store. "I suppose you have found employment after all, Miss Crenshaw," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness and real venom. "How enterprising of you." "I have, thank you," Tabitha replied, keeping her voice level despite the anger burning in her chest. "I will be working as a housekeeper for Mr. Harris." "Oh, is that what they are calling it now? How very modern." The older woman's eyes glittered with malice. "I do hope you understand that you have made your choice. Decent society will not receive you after this scandal." "You have ruined yourself, my dear." Quentin, who had been waiting by the wagon, apparently heard every word. He stepped up beside Tabitha, his presence large and protective. "Mrs. Whitmore, with all due respect, your opinion of Miss Crenshaw's choices is neither requested nor required. She is a respectable woman taking honest work, and if you or anyone else in this town suggests otherwise, you will answer to me. Are we clear?" Mrs. Whitmore's face went pale, then red. She sputtered something unintelligible and hurried away, her skirts swishing with indignation. Tabitha turned to Quentin, torn between gratitude and concern. "You did not have to do that. You have to live near these people." "No, I do not. I live 5 miles from the nearest neighbor and I like it that way. What these small-minded fools think of me or my choices makes no difference to my life. Let them talk. Their words cannot hurt us unless we let them." But as they loaded Tabitha's meager possessions into the wagon and prepared to leave Spokane behind, she could not help but feel the weight of those judgmental stares. The burden of a reputation destroyed, before it even had a chance to form. She was now, in the eyes of this community, a fallen woman, regardless of the innocence of her situation. The ride back to the homestead was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. But as they climbed into the higher country and left the town behind, Tabitha felt something unexpected. Relief. Freedom. She was escaping the narrow confines of respectable society, trading it for the wild openness of the frontier. Maybe that made her fallen, or maybe it made her free. Spring turned into summer, and Tabitha settled into the rhythms of homestead life with surprising ease. She rose before dawn to cook breakfast for Quentin before he went out to tend the cattle, spent her mornings working in the vegetable garden she had planted and expanded, her afternoons on the endless tasks of frontier housekeeping. She learned to churn butter, preserve vegetables, bake bread in the temperamental wood stove. Her hands, which had once been soft and carefully tended, developed calluses and small scars from her work, but she had never been happier. The isolation that Quentin had warned her about did not bother her as she had expected. There was freedom in the solitude, in the lack of judging eyes and whispered comments. She could wear her simplest dresses without worrying about propriety, could let her hair down and walk barefoot through the grass without concern for appearances. She was simply herself, exactly as she was, and it was enough. Quentin proved to be easy company, respectful of her space but warm in his friendship. They fell into an easy partnership, working together on the larger tasks, eating their meals together, spending evenings by the fire talking or reading from his small collection of books. He told her stories of his cattle drives through Texas, of the characters he had met and the places he had seen. She taught him the folk songs her mother had sung, her voice filling the log house with melodies it had never heard before. And slowly, carefully, something deeper began to grow between them. It started with small things. The way Quentin's eyes lingered on her as she worked in the garden, appreciation and something warmer in his gaze. The way her heart quickened when he came in from the range, his shirt clinging to his broad shoulders, his face tanned from the sun. The accidental touches that seemed to happen more frequently, fingers brushing as they passed dishes at dinner, shoulders bumping as they worked side by side. Tabitha tried to tell herself it meant nothing, that she was simply lonely and he was convenient. But she knew she was lying. She was falling in love with Quentin Harris, with his quiet strength and his gentle respect, with the way he looked at her like she was exactly what he wanted to see. The realization terrified her. She was his employee, dependent on him for her livelihood and shelter. Any romantic entanglement would complicate everything, could ruin the good thing they had built together. She tried to maintain distance, to keep their relationship professional and friendly, but nothing more. Quentin seemed to be fighting the same battle, though she caught him watching her sometimes with an intensity that made her breath catch. They circled each other like wary animals, both aware of the attraction but neither willing to make the first move. The tension broke on a hot July evening when Tabitha went down to the stream to bathe, thinking Quentin was still out checking the northern pasture. She had stripped down to her chemise and was waist deep in the cool water when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She turned, panicked, to see Quentin riding up, then pulling his horse to an abrupt halt when he saw her. For a frozen moment, they simply stared at each other. Tabitha stood in the stream in her soaked undergarment, which clung to every curve of her body, leaving little to imagination. Quentin sat motionless on his horse, his blue eyes dark with something that was definitely not professional respect. "I am sorry," he said, his voice rough. "I did not know you were here. I will go." But he did not move, and neither did she. The air between them seemed charged, crackling with electricity and need. Tabitha knew she should dive under the water, should cover herself, should send him away. Instead, she heard herself say, "You do not have to go." Quentin dismounted slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. He walked to the edge of the stream and she waded toward him, drawn by a force stronger than common sense or propriety. When she was close enough to touch, she stopped, water streaming down her body, her heart hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Tabitha," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I have been trying to be respectful, trying to keep my distance. But God help me, I cannot stop thinking about you. You are in my head every moment, awake or asleep. If you do not feel the same, tell me now and I will walk away, I swear it. But if you do—" She did not let him finish. She closed the distance between them and kissed him, rising on her toes to press her mouth to his, pouring months of longing and loneliness and love into that single connection. For a heartbeat, he went rigid with surprise. Then his arms came around her, pulling her against him despite her wet clothes soaking through his shirt, and he kissed her back with a passion that made her knees weak. They broke apart finally, both breathing hard. Quentin rested his forehead against hers, his hands gentle on her waist. "I need you to understand something," he said, his voice intense. "This is not just desire talking, though Lord knows I desire you. I love you, Tabitha. I have loved you since you stepped out of that blizzard looking like a half-drowned kitten with more courage than sense. I want you to stay, not as my employee but as my wife, if you will have me. I know I am not much of a catch, just a broke cowboy with a hardscrabble homestead and a rough past. But I swear I will spend every day of my life making you happy, making you feel loved and valued and appreciated for exactly who you are." Tears streamed down Tabitha's face, mixing with the water from the stream. "You are everything," she whispered. "Everything I never knew I wanted, everything I never thought I could have. I love you too, Quentin. I love you so much it frightens me." His smile was brilliant, transforming his weathered face into something almost boyish with joy. "Then say yes, marry me." Be my partner in this life we are building." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, absolutely yes." He kissed her again, and this time there was promise in it and hope, and a future unfolding before them like the vast Montana sky. When they finally pulled apart, he wrapped his coat around her shivering shoulders and led her back to the house, his arm protective around her waist. That night, properly dressed and sitting by the fire, they made plans. They would travel to Spokane to be married by the circuit judge who came through once a month. They would face down the gossip and the judgment together, as partners. And then they would return to their homestead and build the life they both wanted, far from the narrow constraints of society. The journey to Spokane 2 weeks later was everything Tabitha had expected and worse. The townspeople stared at them with open hostility as they walked to the courthouse where the judge held his sessions. Mrs. Whitmore and her circle of friends whispered loudly about shotgun weddings and fallen women. Men leered at Tabitha or looked at Quentin with pity, as though he were being trapped into marriage with damaged goods. Quentin held her hand through it all, his grip steady and sure. When the judge, a portly man with kind eyes, asked if there were any objections to the marriage, Mrs. Whitmore actually stood up. "Your Honor, I must protest. This woman is of questionable character. She has been living in sin with Mr. Harris for months. This marriage is a farce designed to cover up their immorality." The judge looked at her over his spectacles. "Mrs. Whitmore, unless you have evidence of actual wrongdoing beyond speculation and gossip, I suggest you sit down. A woman taking honest employment is not a crime, and neither is a man offering it. Now, are there any legitimate objections?" Silence fell. Mrs. Whitmore sat down, her face scarlet with indignation. The judge turned back to Quentin and Tabitha with a slight smile. "Proceed." The ceremony was simple and quick, but when Quentin slipped a simple gold band onto Tabitha's finger and the judge pronounced them husband and wife, she felt the weight and wonder of it settle over her like a cloak. She was married. She was Tabitha Harris now, wife of a cowboy and homesteader, partner in a life that would be hard but would be theirs. Quentin kissed her in front of everyone, a long, thorough kiss that left no doubt about his feelings. When they finally broke apart, she could see Mrs. Whitmore and her friends storming out of the courthouse in a huff, but she found she did not care. Their opinions held no power over her anymore. They spent their wedding night in the Spokane House Hotel, the same place where Tabitha had stayed when she first arrived in this town, friendless and alone. But everything was different now. She was not alone anymore. She had Quentin and he had her, and they had each other in every way that mattered. Quentin was gentle with her, patient with her inexperience, reverent in his exploration of her body. "You are perfect," he murmured against her skin, his hands tracing the curves she had been taught to hide and despise. "Every inch of you is perfect." Under his touch, his words, his love, Tabitha finally believed it. She was perfect for him, and he for her, and together they were complete in a way she had never imagined possible. They returned to the homestead the next morning as husband and wife, and Tabitha felt like she was truly coming home. The log house that had sheltered her, the land that had given her purpose, the life she had built here in the wilderness, it was all truly hers now, shared with the man she loved. The summer passed in a haze of work and love and growing intimacy. They fell into new rhythms as a married couple, learning each other's habits and preferences, building a partnership that went far beyond the practical arrangements they had started with. Quentin consulted her on decisions about the ranch, valued her opinions, treated her as an equal partner in every way. Tabitha threw herself into improving their homestead, expanding the garden, starting a small chicken coop, making the house more comfortable and welcoming. By autumn, when the aspen trees turned gold and the nights grew crisp with the promise of winter, Tabitha realized she had missed her monthly courses twice. Her breasts were tender, her stomach occasionally queasy in the mornings. She was carrying Quentin's child. The realization filled her with equal parts joy and terror. Childbirth was dangerous on the frontier, far from doctors and help. Women died in labor all the time, leaving behind grieving husbands and motherless babies. But when she told Quentin, watching his face transform with wonder and delight, she pushed those fears aside and let herself feel only happiness. "We are having a baby," he repeated, as though he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents. Are you pleased?" She asked, suddenly uncertain. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Pleased does not begin to cover it. I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. A child, our child. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." They prepared for the baby's arrival with the same practical determination they brought to all aspects of homestead life. Quentin made a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving simple designs into the headboard. Tabitha sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at the smallness of the garments. They talked about names, about their hopes for their child, about the kind of parents they wanted to be. The neighbor 5 miles away, a rancher named Bill Thompson with a wife and 3 children, stopped by in October with an invitation to their first real social gathering. His wife, Margaret, was a sturdy woman with a practical manner and a warm smile. "I heard you got married and settled in," she said to Tabitha, looking her over with frank assessment. "About time Quentin found himself a good woman. This life is too hard to do alone." Unlike the women of Spokane, Margaret showed no judgment about Tabitha's figure or her circumstances. She simply accepted her as Quentin's wife and a fellow frontier woman facing the same challenges and hardships. When Tabitha mentioned the baby, Margaret's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Your first? How wonderful! You will want help when the time comes." "I have birthed 3 of my own and helped deliver a dozen more. When you are getting close, send Quentin to fetch me. I will come and stay until the baby arrives safely." The offer was a lifeline, easing some of Tabitha's fears. She was not as alone as she had thought. There was community out here in the wilderness, just of a different kind than the judgmental society of Spokane. Winter came early and hard that year, just as Quentin had warned. By November, snow lay 3 feet deep around the homestead, and temperatures plunged so low that water froze solid in the basin overnight despite the fire. They were snowed in for weeks at a time, completely isolated from the outside world. But Tabitha found she did not mind. The house was warm, their supplies were adequate, and she had Quentin. They spent long evenings by the fire, Quentin reading aloud while Tabitha knitted baby clothes, or both of them simply talking, sharing their dreams and fears and everyday observations. Sometimes they made love, Quentin careful of her growing belly, reverent of the life she carried. Other times they simply held each other, drawing comfort from the warmth and presence of another human being in the vast white silence of the frozen world outside. Tabitha's belly swelled as winter deepened. By January, she was large and ungainly, struggling with tasks that had once been simple. Quentin took over most of the household chores without complaint, insisting she rest and preserve her strength for the ordeal ahead. He was tender and attentive, fetching her water and adjusting her pillows, rubbing her aching back and swollen feet. "I never knew I could love anyone the way I love you," he told her one night as they lay together in bed, his hand resting on her belly where their baby kicked and rolled. "You have given me everything. A home, a family, a reason to keep going. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I thank God for you every single day. You saved me, Tabitha said softly. "When I was lost in that storm, you took me in. When the town rejected me, you valued me. You made me believe I was worth something, that I deserved love and respect. You gave me a life I never thought I could have." "We saved each other," Quentin replied. "We found each other when we both needed it most. That is not luck or chance. That is grace." The baby came in early March, during a brief thaw when the roads were just barely passable. Quentin rode through dangerous, slushy conditions to fetch Margaret Thompson, who arrived with her supplies and her calm competence just as Tabitha's labor began in earnest. The next 12 hours were the longest and hardest of Tabitha's life. She had thought she knew pain, had endured hardship and difficulty. But nothing had prepared her for the all-consuming agony of childbirth. The way it took over her entire body and mind until there was nothing but pain and the desperate need to push, to get this baby out, to end the ordeal. Margaret guided her through it with steady encouragement while Quentin held her hand, his face pale with worry but his grip strong and sure. When the baby finally emerged in a rush of blood and fluid, its first cry filling the room, Tabitha collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure but flooded with relief. "A boy," Margaret announced, placing the squalling infant on Tabitha's chest. "A big, healthy boy." Tabitha looked down at her son, at his red face and tiny fists, at the dark hair plastered to his skull. Love hit her like a physical force, so powerful it brought fresh tears to her eyes. This was her child, hers and Quentin's, the product of their love and their union. Quentin leaned over them both, his own eyes wet. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Just perfect. What should we call him?" They had discussed names but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at her son, Tabitha knew. "Thomas," she said. "Thomas Harris, after my father before the drink took him, when he was still the man I loved." "Thomas," Quentin repeated, testing the name. He reached out a tentative finger and the baby grasped it with surprising strength. "Welcome to the world, son. We have been waiting for you." The weeks after Thomas's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feeding, of learning to care for this tiny, demanding creature who had taken over their lives completely. Margaret stayed for a week, teaching Tabitha how to nurse, how to swaddle, how to interpret the baby's different cries. When she finally left, promising to return soon, Tabitha felt both grateful for the help and relieved to have her family to herself again. Quentin was a devoted father, taking his turn walking the floor with a fussy baby, changing soiled cloths without complaint, marveling at every tiny development. "He smiled at me," he would announce, or "he is holding his head up better today." His love for his son was evident in every word, every touch, every proud gaze. As spring arrived and the snow melted into rushing streams, Tabitha gradually regained her strength. Her body had changed with pregnancy and birth, her curves even more pronounced, her belly soft and marked with silvery lines. But when she looked in the mirror now, she did not see something shameful or wrong. She saw a woman who had done something incredible, who had created life and brought it into the world. She saw strength and capability and worth. Summer brought new challenges and new joys. Thomas grew rapidly, becoming more alert and responsive. He would watch them with wide eyes as they went about their work, and his gummy smiles could light up even the hardest day. The Thompson family visited regularly now that the weather allowed, and their children adored the baby, begging to hold him and play with him. In July, they received an unexpected visitor. A rider approached the homestead one afternoon, and Quentin went out to meet him with his rifle, always wary of strangers. But the man held up his hands in peace. "I am looking for Quentin Harris," he called. "I have a letter for him from the land office." Quentin accepted the envelope with suspicion, but his expression changed as he read the contents. When he came back inside, he was smiling. "We did it," he said, picking Tabitha up and spinning her around despite her protests and Thomas's startled cry. "We proved up on the homestead. The land is officially ours, 160 acres free and clear. We own it, Tabitha. It is really ours." They celebrated that night after Thomas was asleep, making love with the quiet intensity of two people who knew exactly how lucky they were, how easily things could have turned out differently. Afterwards, lying tangled together in their bed, Quentin traced lazy patterns on Tabitha's skin. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Giving up the chance for a respectable life in town, tying yourself to a rough cowboy in the middle of nowhere?" Tabitha twisted to look at him, at his handsome face shadowed in the lamplight, at the love and vulnerability in his blue eyes. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "This life, this place, you and Thomas, this is everything I never knew I wanted. The town would have crushed me, turned me into something small and afraid. Here I can be exactly who I am. I can be free." "You are perfect for this frozen homestead," Quentin said, echoing the words he had said to her that first week when she had doubted whether she could handle the isolation and hardship. "Perfect for this life. Perfect for me." "And you are perfect for me," Tabitha replied, kissing him softly. "My cowboy who saw past what everyone else saw, who valued me when the world said I was worthless. You gave me everything." The years that followed were not always easy. They faced harsh winters and summer droughts, cattle losses and crop failures, illness and injury and all the hardships that came with frontier life. But they faced them together, as partners and lovers and best friends. Their family grew with the addition of 2 more children, a daughter they named Sarah and another son called James. The homestead grew too, as they added more land and cattle, built a larger barn and expanded the house. Tabitha never returned to Spokane if she could help it, and when necessity required a trip to town, she held her head high and ignored the whispers that still followed her. Mrs. Whitmore and her circle of friends had not softened their judgment over the years, but Tabitha found she truly did not care. Their opinions held no power over her happiness. Instead, she found community among the other ranch families scattered across the territory, women like Margaret Thompson, who measured worth by character and capability rather than appearance or conformity. These women became her friends, gathering for quilting bees and barn raisings, supporting each other through the births and deaths and daily struggles of frontier existence. When Thomas was 5 years old, the territorial government established a school in a settlement halfway between the Harris homestead and town. Tabitha insisted they send him, wanting her children to have the education she had never received. Quentin agreed, though it meant a long ride twice a day to bring Thomas to and from the schoolhouse. The teacher, a young woman named Miss Emily Foster from Boston, came to dinner one evening and pronounced Thomas a bright student with a quick mind. She looked around the neat, comfortable house with obvious surprise. "I apologize," she said, coloring slightly. "I was told in town that you lived in primitive conditions, barely scraping by. But this is a lovely home and your children are clearly well cared for." "The people in town like to talk," Tabitha said mildly. "They have certain ideas about how things should be and we do not fit their expectations. But we are happy and that is what matters." Miss Foster nodded slowly. "I am beginning to understand that the people in Spokane are not always reliable sources of information. They seem more concerned with judgment than truth." She became a frequent visitor after that, and eventually she married Bill and Margaret Thompson's eldest son, joining the community of hardy frontier families who had carved out lives in the Washington Territory wilderness. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quentin surprised Tabitha by taking her on a trip to Seattle, leaving the children with the Thompsons for a week. It was the first time she had been away from the homestead and her family since Thomas's birth, and the bustling city overwhelmed her with its noise and crowds and relentless activity. But Quentin had planned every detail carefully. He took her to a fine hotel where they had a room with an actual bathtub and clean sheets changed daily. He bought her a beautiful dress from a seamstress shop, emerald green silk that fit her curves perfectly and made her feel elegant and womanly. They ate in restaurants where other people cooked and served the food, and they walked along the waterfront watching ships come and go from distant ports. On their last night in the city, over dinner in a restaurant with white tablecloths and crystal glasses, Quentin took her hand. "I want you to know," he said, his blue eyes serious, "that I understand the sacrifices you made to build this life with me. You could have had an easier existence, more comfort, more society. Instead, you chose isolation and hardship and endless work." "I chose love," Tabitha interrupted. "I chose partnership and freedom and a life that is genuinely mine. I would make the same choice every single time. I know you would, but I also know it has not always been easy, and I wanted to give you this. A week to be served instead of serving, to be pampered instead of working, to remember that you are more than just a homesteader's wife and mother. You are a woman, beautiful and valuable in your own right." Tears gathered in Tabitha's eyes. After 10 years of marriage, Quentin could still surprise her with his thoughtfulness, his understanding of what she needed even when she did not realize it herself. "Thank you," she whispered. "This week has been wonderful, but I am ready to go home, to our children and our homestead and our life. Because that is where I belong, where I want to be." They returned to find Thomas, Sarah, and James healthy and happy, full of stories about their week with the Thompson family. The homestead looked more beautiful to Tabitha than any city site, the log house solid and welcoming, the land green and prosperous under the summer sun. As the years continued to pass, Tabitha watched her children grow into capable, confident young people. Thomas inherited his father's quiet strength and his mother's determination. Sarah was bright and fearless, unafraid to speak her mind or challenge expectations. James was gentle and thoughtful, with a gift for working with animals. They all grew up understanding the value of hard work and the importance of judging people by their character rather than their appearance or circumstances. Thomas eventually went to college in Seattle, the first in either family to receive higher education. He became a lawyer and returned to the territory to fight for the rights of homesteaders and small ranchers against the encroachment of larger interests. Sarah married a neighboring rancher's son and started her own homestead, running it with the same competence her mother had shown. James stayed to help run the family ranch, taking over more responsibilities as Quentin's knees grew stiff and his back ached from decades of hard labor. Tabitha's hair turned gray at the temples, and lines appeared around her eyes and mouth. Maps of laughter and tears and years lived fully. Her body remained full and curved, softened further by age and childbearing. But when Quentin looked at her, she could see the same love and desire in his eyes that had been there when he pulled her from the stream that summer day so long ago. "You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," he told her on their 25th anniversary, and she knew he meant it completely. They had built something remarkable together, she reflected as she stood on the porch of their home watching the sun set over the mountains. From that desperate meeting in a spring blizzard, they had created a life, a family, a legacy. The town of Spokane had rejected her, called her unsuitable and improper and too much. But Quentin had seen her worth, had offered her not just employment but partnership and love. More than that, this frozen homestead, this harsh and beautiful land, had welcomed her when society would not. It had demanded everything from her and given her everything in return. It had stripped away the shallow concerns about appearance and propriety, leaving only what mattered: strength, character, love, and the courage to build a life on her own terms. When Tabitha was 50 years old, she became a grandmother for the first time when Sarah gave birth to twin girls. Holding those tiny babies, she felt the circle of life completing itself. She had been rejected by the world for not fitting its narrow definitions of acceptable femininity. But she had found acceptance and love and purpose in the wilderness, and she had raised children who understood that true worth had nothing to do with conforming to others' expectations. Quentin's health began to fail in his 60s, the years of hard labor taking their inevitable toll. But even as his body weakened, his love for Tabitha remained constant and strong. They spent quiet evenings together, reminiscing about their years together, marveling at the life they had built. "I was so lost when I met you," Tabitha said one winter night as they sat by the fire in the house that had been their home for over 30 years. "I had nothing, was nothing in the eyes of the world, and you saw me, really saw me, and loved me anyway." "Not anyway," Quentin corrected gently, his voice rougher with age but still warm. "I loved you because of who you are, not in spite of it. Your curves that the town called too much, your strength that they found unfeminine, your refusal to shrink yourself to fit their expectations, those are the things that made me fall in love with you. You were exactly what I needed, exactly who I needed. You still are." He died peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks later, his hand clasped in Tabitha's. She grieved deeply for the loss of her partner, her love, her best friend. But even in her grief, she felt gratitude for the decades they had shared, for the life they had built together against all odds. Their children and grandchildren gathered for the funeral, held on the homestead Quentin had carved from the wilderness. They buried him on a hill overlooking the land he had loved, with a simple stone marker bearing his name and the years of his life. Thomas spoke eloquently about his father's character and legacy. Sarah shared stories that made everyone laugh through their tears. James simply stood with his arm around his mother, offering silent support. After everyone had left and Tabitha stood alone at the grave, Margaret Thompson appeared at her side. She was elderly now herself, her hair completely white, but her presence was still strong and comforting. "He was a good man," Margaret said simply, "and you were good for each other. Not many people find what you two had." "I know," Tabitha replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I was too curvy for the town, too much for their narrow minds, but he told me I was perfect for this frozen homestead, perfect for the life he wanted to build. And he was right. This place, this life, it fit me in a way nothing else ever could have." "You made it fit," Margaret corrected. "You and Quentin both. You took what the world said you could not have and you built it anyway, through sheer determination and love. That is your real legacy, more than the land or the cattle or even the children, though they are all wonderful. You proved that happiness does not come from fitting someone else's mold. It comes from having the courage to be yourself and finding someone who loves you for exactly who you are." Tabitha lived another 15 years, spending them on the homestead with James and his wife and their growing family. She taught her grandchildren to garden and cook, shared stories of the early days when the land was still wild and untamed, when she and Quentin had been young and building their dreams one hard day at a time. She never remarried, never even considered it. She had been blessed with a great love, the kind that comes once in a lifetime if you are lucky. She had no desire to search for a pale imitation of what she had shared with Quentin. On a crisp autumn morning when Tabitha was 65 years old, she did not wake up. James found her peacefully still in her bed, a slight smile on her weathered face, as though she had gone to sleep and simply decided not to return. They buried her next to Quentin on the hill, overlooking the land they had loved. Two simple stones side by side marking the resting place of a cowboy, and the woman who had been too curvy for the town but perfect for everything that truly mattered. At the funeral, Thomas told his own children and grandchildren the story of how their grandparents had met, how a spring blizzard had brought together two lost souls who found in each other exactly what they needed. He told them how the town had rejected Tabitha for not fitting their narrow ideals, how Quentin had seen past society's judgment to the remarkable woman beneath. "Your grandmother taught us that worth is not determined by other people's opinions," he said, his lawyer's voice carrying clearly in the autumn air. "She taught us that conforming to expectations is not nearly as important as being true to yourself. She was told she was too much, but she found a life where exactly who she was exactly enough. She found love and purpose and belonging, not by changing herself but by finding a place and a person that valued her for her authentic self. That is the legacy she left us. That is what we should remember and honor." Sarah added her own memories, stories of her mother's strength and wisdom, her gentle guidance and fierce protection of her family. James spoke of his mother's tireless work, her dedication to the homestead and everyone who lived on it, the way she created a home that was warm and welcoming even in the hardest times. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren listened to these stories and looked at the two graves on the hill, and they understood that they came from something special. Not wealth or status or social position, but something far more valuable. They came from love, authentic and deep and lasting. They came from two people who had refused to let the world define their worth, who had built a life based on their own values and dreams. The homestead remained in the family for generations, passed down from parents to children, each generation adding their own improvements while honoring the foundation that Quentin and Tabitha had laid. The house was expanded and modernized, but the original log structure remained at its heart, a reminder of where it all began. In Spokane, as the years passed and the frontier town grew into a modern city, the story of Tabitha Crenshaw and Quentin Harris became something of a local legend. The details shifted and changed with each retelling, but the core remained the same. A woman rejected by society for not conforming to its standards. A cowboy who saw her worth when others saw only flaws. A love story that defied expectations and created a legacy that outlasted judgment and gossip. Mrs. Whitmore's descendants, when they heard the tale, felt a distant embarrassment for their ancestors' cruelty, though they did not fully understand the courage it had taken for Tabitha to walk through that town with her head held high. They lived in a different time, with different standards, and could not quite grasp what it had meant to be a woman who did not fit the mold in an era when conformity was everything. But on the homestead that had been Tabitha's refuge and Quentin's dream, their descendants understood perfectly. They looked at the land their great-great-grandparents had worked, at the house they had built, at the family they had created, and they knew the truth. Love is not about finding someone perfect by the world's standards. It is about finding someone perfect for you, someone who sees your worth when others see only flaws, someone who values exactly who you are. On quiet winter evenings, when snow blankets the land and the wind howls down from the mountains just as it did on that long-ago day when a lost woman found shelter in a storm, The family gathers and tells the old stories. They speak of Tabitha's courage and Quentin's vision, of the life they built together against all odds. They remember a love that began with a simple observation and a generous offer, that grew through shared work and mutual respect, that deepened into something profound and lasting. And they understand that sometimes the places that seem harshest, the lives that seem hardest, are exactly where we are meant to be. That sometimes being rejected by society is not a tragedy but a blessing, freeing us to find our own path and our own truth. That sometimes the person who says, "You are perfect," when the world says, "You are too much," is offering not just love but salvation. The frozen homestead welcomed Tabitha when the warm town rejected her. The rough cowboy loved her when refined society scorned her. And in that welcome and that love, she found not just survival but joy, not just acceptance but belonging, not just existence but a life fully and authentically lived. That is the legacy that matters, the story worth remembering, the truth that echoes down through generations. Not the harsh judgments of small-minded people, not the narrow standards of a society that could not see past appearances, but the enduring power of love to transform lives and create something beautiful from the most unlikely beginnings. The wind still blows cold across the Washington Territory, now a state for over a century. The homestead still stands, expanded and improved, but fundamentally unchanged. And somewhere on that hill overlooking the land they loved, two souls rest side by side, their earthly journey complete but their love story continuing in the lives of everyone they touched and everyone who came after. She was too curvy for the town, they said. Too much, too different, too improper for polite society. But a cowboy looked at her in the midst of a spring blizzard and saw exactly what he needed. "You are perfect for this frozen homestead," he told her, and he was right. More than right. She was perfect for him, perfect for the life they built together, perfect in every way that truly mattered. And that, in the end, is all that any of us can hope for. Not to fit some arbitrary standard of acceptable, but to find the place and the people where exactly who we are is exactly enough. To be loved not in spite of our differences, but because of them. To build a life that is authentically our own, regardless of what society says we should want or be. Tabitha Crenshaw found that in the wilderness of Washington Territory in 1882. She found it in the arms of a cowboy named Quentin Harris, who saw her worth when the world saw only flaws. She found it in the hard work and isolation of frontier life, in the rhythm of seasons and the cycle of planting and harvest, in the joy of children and grandchildren carrying forward the values she and Quentin had lived by. She found it, and she held on to it, and she built something lasting and true. And in doing so, she left behind a legacy far greater than social acceptance or material wealth. She left behind the truth that love sees what judgment cannot, that worth is inherent and not dependent on conformity, that the hardest paths sometimes lead to the most beautiful destinations. The frozen homestead is warm with memories now, filled with the laughter of children who never knew their great-great-grandparents, but who carry their strength and courage and capacity for love in their very bones. The town that rejected Tabitha has long since forgotten its judgment. The people who whispered about her turned to dust and their opinions meaningless in the face of time's passage. But the love remains. The story remains. The truth remains. She was too curvy for the town. But she was perfect for the frozen homestead, perfect for the cowboy who claimed it, perfect for the life they built together in defiance of every expectation and judgment. And that perfection, that rightness, that love created something that endures long after the voices of criticism have faded into silence. That is the ending, and the beginning, and the eternal truth of Tabitha and Quentin's story. Not a tale of changing yourself to fit the world, but of finding the world where you fit exactly as you are. Not a story of conforming to love, but of being loved for your authentic self. Not a narrative of compromise and settling, but of holding out for the person and the place in the life where you are enough, where you are valued, where you are home. The frozen homestead stands as testament to that truth, generation after generation. A monument not built of stone but of love and courage, and the revolutionary act of being exactly who you are in a world that demands you be something else. And in that monument, in that legacy, Tabitha Crenshaw and Quentin Harris live on, their love story complete and perfect and eternally true.